This is Professor Ludlum. This is the Law of International Business Transactions, LS 4533. This is Chapter 19, our last chapter. Chapter 20 and 21 we omit, so they're not on the tests. They're not on the final. You skip those two chapters completely. And this is our last chapter to review, so if you're as sick of hearing my own voice as I am, at least we're at the finish line. Chapter 19 talks about some labor problems that you have dealing with businesses setting up in foreign countries. There's a lot of problems that you can have in business. Trust me. Despite the idea of what we think of as labor problems in America, you have the notion that there's a whole different expectation about how labor operates in other countries. For example, in the U.S., we have the approach that there's a clear distinction between labor and management, and one of which management has the say on the business, as opposed to the German approach that the workers are considered kind of an equal partner in management, as far as they have influence, not total influence, but they have a big influence in the board of directors and major decisions that are made. Very different approach than the U.S. approach. And of course, the Japanese approach, there really isn't a clear distinction between management and labor because of their perceptions of the labor market. There isn't a distinction like we have in the United States. And so the whole notion of how labor works in foreign countries is dramatically different. For example, remember all those, we've talked about some of the previous problems of, say, Mexico having a 48-hour work week versus America's 40. Or remember the evergreen contracts we talked about, that in Europe, if you have a long-term employment agreement, you can only terminate an employee with 3 months written notice. All these are those little landmines of employment issues that you've got to have somebody local to help you with. In America, we have the concept of at-will employment. Most of our states follow this. Oklahoma's an at-will state. You can be fired at any time for any reason except certain public policy reasons. Whereas the attitude in Europe is there must be a justifiable reason. Certainly the whims at which you can fire somebody in America aren't valid in Europe. And in Japanese, their culture is dramatically different as far as long-term employment. So the whole notion of all the different labor standards, safety standards, what things do you have to provide for the workers? Do you have to provide them safety goggles and all these kind of things? Dealing with labor unions, how they define employment discrimination. All these things are different when you're dealing with a different country. The problem is for an American business, their mindset is so geared towards, well, this is how we do it in America. That's what you think of when you think of labor unions, employment discrimination, and it may operate very differently when you're operating in a foreign country. For example, Japan's cultural aspect of employment is lifetime labor, the shishin. The idea is that when you graduate college, right, if you're looking at a permanent work position, you will go work for a huge conglomerate, and you'll work there until you retire. Now your role within the company will increase or decrease on the basis of your skills. The better skills you have, the more you'll move up with the company, and the poorer skills you have, it may decline. But you are expected to work with that company for your entire life. And so there's an awful lot of commitment, and the notion of labor versus management, all those distinctions are blurred because everyone's viewed as having a permanent commitment to the company. The problem is a lot of Japan's businesses, especially in the technology areas, are rapidly changing and don't want to have lifetime employees. They want to dramatically change, and that's becoming difficult culturally to adjust. And so they've adjusted a lot of their labor rules and their labor culture to this very rapidly changing environment in the labor force among especially technology companies. Give you another example of one of recent problems that's popped up. Singapore. Again, Singapore has a small domestic workforce. Again, it's a small nation. But the idea is Singapore enacted a law that basically says you have to give employment preference for local workers before you hire an international worker. Again, as long as you have over 25 employees and the salary requirements are within their ratios, you have to give preference for a local worker. Again, from America's standpoint, this is open employment discrimination, but again, different countries allow it or, in fact, encourage it in order to protect their domestic workforce. Last one I'll mention is France. This has popped up, again, dealing with some businesses that foreign-owned businesses operate in France. France has always had a prohibition of business on Sunday. The problem is, if you've visited France, and I have several times, on Sunday everything's open. Everybody openly violated the law. But workers, when they were complaining about their business and fighting foreign firms that didn't want to pay them what they perceived as fair wages, then turned in all their employers saying, well, they violated this 100-year-old law dealing with hiring workers or making people work on Sunday, and that's against French law, despite the fact that everyone openly violates it. It's still technically illegal, and so turned in a lot of their workers on this labor issue. And so when you deal abroad with all these kinds of workers, you have a variety of problems that you face. I can't stress strongly enough for you to always get local assistance wherever you are locating your business. Someone who knows the lay of the land, how the political system works, how the labor system works, how the financial system works, so that you can do the best for your business. It's not just as easy as saying, my business was profitable in Oklahoma, I can put it somewhere else exactly the same and it'll work there. It's just not that simple. But that concludes our discussion. So good luck. Again, watch your deadlines and keep on track.